Backtracking.
Attempts were made to buy land and build railroads in Iowa in the 1850s, but because of a severe economic recession, things didn't really get seriously started until after the Civil War. Iowa Falls didn't become a railroad town by chance. Much politics was involved. Iowa Falls actually had a couple of potential strikes against it. First, the river, which would require a high bridge and all the hazards that involved. Second, another bridge to cross Rock Run to enter the main town directly from the east. The railroads decided to cross the river without crossing Rock Run, avoiding the main town altogether. That's why Iowa Falls has a railroad street that never got its hoped-for railroad. Fortunately, Iowa Falls had things in its favor. It was an established, populated town with multiple sources of water. It had a good location and more than adequate sources of investor funds. Towns missed by the main lines died. This concentration of railroads on the east side of town attracted new immigrant labor from countries like Ireland, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries. Many of these people had followed the development of the railroads westward. If Washington and Roxylvania are the two most historic avenues in Iowa Falls, then Railroad is certainly the street with the most enigmatic name. There was never a railroad there, and contrary to popular belief, there has never been a railroad in downtown Iowa Falls. Ever. The railroads crossed the river east of downtown before crossing Rock Run. Railroad Street was only a local proposal for the railroad. Actually, entering Iowa Falls on the originally proposed route would have required building a bridge across Rock Run Canyon, which would have been time-consuming, expensive, and dangerous. A single bridge was built over the river instead. Local horse-drawn trams carried passengers to and from the railroad across Rock Run to downtown. Fortunately, the railroads connected Iowa Falls, so the town didn't become a ghost town like Hardin City, another little town that, similar to Iowa Falls, was also located on a problematic peninsular bend in the river. 56 years ago, on July 25, 1969, passenger rail service ended in Iowa Falls. Actually, the high times of passenger rail service ended nearly 50 years before that in the 1920s. For all their importance to the creation of Iowa Falls, the real glory days of railroading only lasted about 50 years in Iowa Falls, from 1870 until around 1920. We can divide the railroad era into three distinct periods: 1870 to 1920, 1920 to 1970, and 1970 to 2025. We aren't likely to see passenger rail service again in Iowa Falls until our local population begins to grow rapidly or there is a real commitment to passenger rail service nationwide. Currently, you need to travel to south central Iowa if you would like to ride Amtrak. Amtrak is quite an experience to vacation upon.
1870 to 1920. (1920 to 1970). 1970 to 2025.
The east side of Iowa Falls, in the old commercial district between the ghost town of Roxylvania and the Roxylvania Avenue Bridge, has got to be one of the most eerie-feeling places there can be in Iowa Falls if you realize just what you are walking through. It's difficult to imagine that such a thriving and bustling place could completely vanish into a discarded neighborhood. The reasons for this are many, but what was once cheap gasoline encouraged the development of the interstate highway system and an automobile in every garage. Commuter passenger rail vanished, and we are at present locked into costly fuel and expensive automobile insurance. It's unknown if there will ever be anything like a Rock Island Depot in Iowa Falls again, but it's doubtful it will return to this exact location. Will young people experience the Union Pacific?
The depots.
At the turn of the century, the station master was the clerk, telegrapher, baggage man, and did a half a dozen other things. The Illinois Central Depot, written by the late Bill Riley, Mr. State Fair. The Illinois Central Depot was built in 1904 and stylistically eclectic. It is typical of stations built during this era. It has been changed little through the years and has been placed on the National Register. At one time, this station was a hub of activity as many passenger trains stopped in Iowa Falls daily. I may be spending an inordinate amount of time on the east side, but I feel strongly that the area is responsible for the success of Iowa Falls because of the railroads. I remember the two big depots, the Rock Island and the Illinois Central, and the great puffing behemoths chugging through the area 24 hours a day. Freight trains, passenger trains, troop trains, and circus trains. Oh, the excitement of seeing a circus train unload here at the Illinois Central Depot. I remember being at the Rock Island Depot as the first of the new diesel super trains, the Rock Island Rocket, came through from Des Moines to Minneapolis. The engineer that big day was my Uncle Henry O'Neill. The conductor was my Uncle Charlie O'Neill. Each was to serve the Rock Island lines for over 50 years. The depots were so exciting, so busy, a place where the giant steam engines pulled trains to places you could only dream about.
The roundhouse.
Ghosts of the Rock Island Railroad. Roads are expensive to build and maintain, so no rule says they need to be kept forever or even be built in the first place. Residents are required to be given access to their homes. However, if people cease to live upon the road gradually becomes a B maintenance road and the road eventually disappears. The same is true of railroads, which in the USA are private businesses. Railroad tracks and easements come and go, just like the old BCR and N became the Rock Island. Both the Rock Island and the Illinois Central became parts of other railroads. Today we have the Union Pacific and the Canadian National. For now, anyway. Vanishing roads, vanishing heritage.